The wind that morning carried more than dust. It carried silence, and silence had a strange way of speaking out here in the American frontier. Jed Carter had lived long enough on the open plains to understand what silence meant. It meant something was missing. Sometimes it meant rain, sometimes danger, and sometimes, like that morning, it meant sorrow was close. The sun had barely climbed over the distant mesas when Jed rode his horse, Duke, back toward his small ranch on the edge of Willow Creek. His saddle creaked softly, the leather worn smooth from years of work and loneliness. Life had been quiet since his wife, Clara, passed away 3 winters ago. He'd raised his 8-year-old son, Ben, alone, working the land, fixing fences, and making sure his boy grew up knowing right from wrong, even in a world that didn't always reward the good-hearted. That morning, Jed's thoughts were on the upcoming cattle drive, how many head he could sell, whether the storm clouds in the north meant trouble, when he saw something that made him pull the reins tight. Down by the creek, a wagon had tipped on its side, one wheel broken clean off. The mule that once pulled it was nowhere to be seen, and beside the wreck sat a woman and a little girl. The woman's face was pale, her dress torn at the hem, her bonnet sagging like it had been through rain and misery both. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, her hands clutching a ragged doll that had no face left, just loose stitching where its eyes once were. Jed slowed his horse, eyes narrowing as he approached. In these parts, a man couldn't be too careful, not since outlaws and drifters had started using pity to get close to decent folks. Still, something in that girl's stillness tugged at him. "You folks all right?" He called out, his voice calm but distant. The woman flinched as though the sound of kindness had startled her. "We'll be fine," she said weakly, though her voice betrayed her. It had the sound of someone who'd been saying that for far too long without believing it. The little girl turned to her mother, her voice small and trembling. "Are we bad people, Mama?" The words hit Jed like a hammer to the chest. For a moment the wind stopped. He saw the mother freeze, eyes glistening as she pressed the child closer. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "We're just tired." But Jed had heard the girl's question, and he'd seen enough pain in his own boy to know what it meant. It meant they'd been pushed too far, blamed for things they never did, or maybe simply forgotten by a world too cruel to notice. Jed dismounted, his boots crunching the dry soil. "That wagon of yours won't make it far," he said, kneeling beside it. "Where are you headed?" The woman hesitated. "West," she finally said. "I've got a brother near Silver Rock. Thought we could start again there." She looked down. "But we lost the mule yesterday. It broke loose when the storm came." Her voice cracked on that last word, and Jed could see the truth. She had no way left to travel, no food, and no hope except the small hand of her daughter holding hers. Jed took off his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Silver Rock's a long ride," he said. "You won't make it on foot." The woman lowered her head, ashamed. "We didn't mean to trouble anyone. We just needed a place to rest." Jed looked at her, truly looked, and saw the dirt beneath her nails, the blisters on her palms, the hollow eyes of someone who'd seen too many nights without shelter. He thought of Clara, his late wife, who never turned anyone away when they knocked at their door. He thought of Ben, his boy, who once asked him why people had to be mean to survive. And as the silence hung between them, Jed Carter made a choice. "Come on," he said finally. "You and the little one can ride with me. My place ain't much, but it's got a roof and a stove that still burns. Hot." The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. "You don't even know us." "Don't need to," Jed replied. "I know what it's like to need help." He helped them onto the horse, the little girl sitting in front of him as the woman clung to the saddle behind. As they rode toward his ranch, the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning chill. But the girl's words still echoed in Jed's mind. "Are we bad people, Mama?" He wondered what kind of world could make a child think that kindness and decency were sins. When they reached the ranch, Ben came running out from the barn, wiping sweat and straw from his face. "Who's that, Pa?" he asked, his eyes curious but cautious. "Guests," Jed said simply. "Set out another plate for supper," Ben nodded, though he looked at the strangers with the kind of quiet suspicion that children learn early when life teaches them how fragile trust can be. Inside the small cabin, the smell of stew filled the air. The woman, who introduced herself as Mary Whitlow, sat at the table, her daughter, Emily, fast asleep on the bed by the stove. Mary explained in pieces that her husband had died in a mining accident a year back. The company had promised her compensation, but the papers got lost, as they said. She'd sold what little she had to buy that wagon, hoping her brother might take them in. But folks don't take kindly to widows traveling alone, she said, her eyes dimming. They think we're trouble. Jed listened quietly. He'd met all kinds, outlaws, drifters, men who'd lost everything and turned mean because of it. But there was no meanness in this woman, just weariness. He handed her a cup of coffee, steaming and black. "You're safe here," he said. "Rest a few days. We'll figure something out." Mary's hand shook as she took the cup. "You don't owe us anything, Mr. Carter," he smiled faintly. "Ain't about owing. Sometimes folks just need a hand." That night, as the fire crackled low and the moonlight spilled across the plains, Jed stood by the window watching the horizon. Ben had already fallen asleep. Beside Emily, the two children curled up like old friends despite the short time they'd known each other, and for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive again, fragile but warm. But the frontier had its own way of testing good deeds. By morning, Jed would learn that not everyone believed in helping strangers, and some would go to great lengths to punish those who did. Still, as he looked at the sleeping girl and her weary mother, Jed Carter knew one thing for sure. He'd rather stand with the broken than live comfortably among the cruel. He turned from the window, whispering to himself, "No, little one, you're not bad people." The sun rose in ribbons of gold over the wide frontier, washing Jed Carter's ranch in a light so still it almost felt sacred. But even sacred mornings could carry trouble. Jed knew that better than most. When he stepped out onto his porch, he could see the tracks already, fresh boot prints in the dust near his gate. Someone had been there while they slept. He squinted toward the open road and caught the faint outline of a rider moving away fast, the dust still hanging in the air behind. Whoever it was, they weren't out for a morning stroll. Jed's jaw tightened. He knew what this meant. In a town as small and suspicious as Willow Creek, strangers didn't stay hidden for long, and gossip traveled faster than the prairie wind. Inside, the smell of cornbread filled the air. Mary was by the stove, humming softly to her little girl, Emily, who sat on a stool eating breakfast. Ben sat opposite her, his usual shyness melting away under Emily's laughter. For the first time in months, Jed saw his boy smile like a child again. It should have been a good morning, but the look in Jed's eyes told a different story. "Someone been snooping around?" Mary asked quietly when she caught him staring out the window. Jed nodded once. "Tracks by the gate. Likely one of Burke's boys." Mary frowned. "Burke, town foreman, thinks he owns half of Willow Creek. Don't like when folks make choices he didn't approve of." Mary's face went pale. "You mean they'd mind that we're here?" Jed's eyes hardened. "They mind anything they don't understand." By mid-morning, the sound of hooves came rolling up the dirt road. Jed stepped outside before the riders reached his porch. 3 men, all dressed in dusty coats, their guns hanging low at their hips. The lead man, Clint Burke, himself, had the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Morning, Carter," Burke said, tipping his hat. "Heard you've been entertaining some company." Jed leaned against the post, unbothered. "You heard right. A woman and her daughter. Wagon broke down by the creek." Burke chuckled low. Sure. Poor helpless souls, I reckon. You ever notice, Carter, how these helpless souls always find their way to good men's property? The other men laughed, but Jed didn't. "She's got a kid." "Burke, you think she's a threat?" Burke shrugged. "Not to me, but we can't have strangers hanging around. You remember what happened last year? Family of drifters came through, and 2 nights later, Hank's store burned down." "I remember," Jed said, his tone sharpening. "But I also remember it was one of your men who owed Hank money." The laughter died quick. Burke's hand rested near his holster, his voice turning to gravel. "You watch your tongue, Carter. I'm just saying, you start harboring strays. Folks'll start thinking you're one of them. Jed didn't flinch. Let 'em think what they want. Burke spat into the dust. Suit yourself, but don't say I didn't warn you. When they finally rode off, Mary came to the door, clutching her shawl tight. You shouldn't have talked to him like that, she whispered. Jed turned toward her. He needed reminding that not everyone here bows to him. Her eyes were full of fear. You don't know what men like him can do. I do, Jed said quietly. That's why I don't back down. Days passed, and whispers began to crawl through Willow Creek like snakes through dry grass. Folks at the trading post started avoiding Jed, and one morning, Ben came home with tears in his eyes. Pa, he said, the other boys at school said you're helping thieves. Said that lady and her kid stole from someone in Silver Rock. Jed crouched down, his big rough hand resting on his son's shoulder. You listen to me, boy. Sometimes people lie because it's easier than admitting they're cruel. We help folks because it's right, not because it's easy. Ben nodded, though confusion clouded his young face. That evening the horizon turned blood red. A storm was brewing, not the kind that brings rain, but the kind that brings men with torches and righteous anger. Jed saw them before they reached the ranch, 5 riders this time, Burke among them. He walked out to meet them, shotgun in hand. The wind howled, tossing dust and grit into the air. Burke reined in his horse. Evening, Carter. Word's out your guests ain't what they seem. Some fella from Silver Rock came through saying they ran off with his savings. Jed's voice stayed calm. That fella's lying. Mary's husband worked for that mine in Silver Rock. I saw the paper she carried. The company cheated her, not the other way round. Burke sneered. You always were a man who thought he knew better than everyone else. Behind him, one of the riders shouted, Let's just take 'em and be done with it. Jed lifted the shotgun, the metal glinting in the firelight. Ain't nobody taken anyone off this land. The standoff stretched long and thin, like the edge of a knife. Burke stared at Jed for several seconds that felt like eternity, then finally barked a cold laugh. You'll regret this, Carter. This ain't the kind of world that rewards good men. Jed's eyes didn't waver. Maybe not. But I still sleep better than you. The riders turned and left, their threats echoing behind them. But Jed knew this wasn't over. When he went back inside, Mary was crying. Silently, her arms around Emily. I can't let you lose your home because of us, she said, her voice breaking. Jed sat beside her. Mary, my home ain't made of wooden nails. It's made of what's right. And what's right is keeping you safe. The next morning, Ben came running from the barn. Pa, the fence is down. Cattle are gone. Jed raced out, seeing the damage, cut wires, trampled posts, deliberate sabotage. It was Burke's doing, and they both knew it. But Jed didn't swear or curse. He just stood there, breathing hard, eyes on the horizon. Then he turned to Ben. Go saddle, Duke. We're not letting this stand. He rode into town that afternoon, the dust trailing behind him like a shadow. When he reached the saloon, every man went quiet. Burke sat at a corner table laughing until he saw Jed walk in. The laughter died. Jed walked straight to him, eyes like steel. You think breaking my fence makes you a man? Burke rose slowly, his smirk fading. You should have learned by now, Carter. This land don't care about good men. Jed leaned in close. Then maybe it's time someone made it care. No one knows exactly what happened after that. Some say Burke reached for his gun first. Others say Jed didn't give him the chance. What's certain is that when the dust settled, Burke was on the floor and Jed's gun still smoking. For a long time, Jed stood there, staring at the man who'd poisoned the town with fear. Then he walked out, calm and unhurried, into the open air. The sheriff came later, but no charges were filed. Most of Willow Creek, it seemed, had seen enough of Burke's rule. A week later, Mary and Emily left for Silver Rock with 2 horses, new supplies, and a promise that they'd start fresh. Ben cried when they rode away, and Jed didn't hide his tears either. That night, father and son sat on the porch under a wide sky full of stars. Pa, Ben asked softly, were we right to help them? Jed looked out toward the dark horizon. Son, out here it don't matter what people say. What matters is who you decide to be when no one's watching. We ain't bad people for helping. We'd be bad if we didn't. And as the wind rolled across the plains once more, carrying the scent of sage and freedom, Jed Carter felt something shift inside him. The world could stay cruel if it wanted, but as long as good men chose to stand their ground, there'd always be hope, even on the edge of nowhere. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, smiling faintly. "Remember, boy, kindness may cost you, but it's still the only thing worth spending." The fire crackled, the stars burned bright, and somewhere far away, the echo of a child's voice seemed to whisper back through the night. "Are we bad people, Mama?" And Jed's heart answered in silence, "No, little one, not anymore."